it's an emergency episode of Plat Chat. So don't worry. There's no real emergency. Your house isn't on fire.
Ruined their ears. 2 seconds into the episode.
Yeah, basically, I mean, the emergency is you might need to turn down your speakers because we've got some hot fire dripping into those ear holes coming straight from Albert.
Jesus.
Yeah, who is the GM of Florida Mayhem, and he's cooked up quite the announcement. We are recording on the day, Albert, that you have actually broken the news to everybody as well across the Overwatch world, and that I gotta say. You did it correctly. That video was fire.
Yep.
Thank you. Yeah, we waited because I think the premise was just like it's not really about the who, it's about the why. And I think having a stream that kind of to premiere the video and then talk about it and then add some, give the fans a reason to like the players that we've signed and get to know the players. I think that was more important than just like who was signed because that excitement lasts like 5 seconds and people are leaking anyways, so it's like all this the initial excitement's already gone, just like okay cool, like wrap it up, right? So yeah, very happy how it turned out.
I mean, I really love how the Florida Mayhem has like sort of turned their entire organization around when it comes to the branding and like the marketing aspect, because we can look back at like the early days with the mixed roster and like the McDonald's colors and all of that now. But it feels like, especially with this announcement, like there's way more of an identity with the Florida Mayhem, because now we have this color scheme going on and you had awesome graphics for today's announcement. Obviously, everyone in the staff helping out to make the announcement as well. You touched on the community, people who helped out making the announcement, many who are part of the Overwatch community, right? So I just love that you integrated so many people into this announcement and made like a big thing out of it. And I'm sure that all of the fans as well, they really appreciate just having a big spectacle about all of it.
Yeah, I feel bad for all the other teams making announcements on the same day because it's kind of like it's just not the same when we've got a full live stream and you're just doing the standard like tweets, right? Like it's just a completely different level.
Yeah,
I'm really glad we were able to give the fans experience, because I was thinking like sports have like press conferences and stuff, and I was like, well, COVID and like there's not like a media day or anything, but why not make our own media day? Like why not have our own virtual press conference essentially with the fans?
So it makes sense.
I was thinking about this actually today because you sparked an idea in my head and I just went down the reinforced rabbit hole immediately. Yeah. And like you said, I think actually you set the standard in some ways now, because you raised the bar in terms of player announcement. And like you could even make an entire week about just like your announcement. We could even have like potentially in the future, speculating of course, like even have the league sanction some of these weeks where you could spread out the media and focus on one team per week maybe. And you could do a player announcement per day, or you could invite staff onto different media outlets, whether it's websites, podcasts like this one, right? And really make more of a show about it, because I think we don't have a ton of content in the off season, and I think you guys really capitalized on that fact and made something happen for your fans, but also the community, right? So I think that's really cool of you guys in the off season. You really raised the bar in terms of announcements.
Thank you. Yeah, we actually, so I mulled around the idea of having like an actual media day and having media there, but then like ESPN Esports got deleted. So then I was like, oh, well, who would we invite now? And so it was like, I was like, we can, like, if we want to do a true like presser with like local news or something, that can be something separate. But we kind of wanted to have a moment with like the fans, and also like, I think everyone that like took part behind the scenes were all people endemic to the community. Like Bluebell's from kind of the tier 2, like she did a lot of tier 2, tier 3, like graphic design. Solomon, works on a vast producer for Vast, his like co-stream and live streams, and Swing Chips also from the community. So I think we thought it was important to like give back to the community and have that community feel, because at the end of the day, like that's, instead of inviting like a bunch of people that don't know anything about Overwatch, like, we get someone from like a newspaper or something, and then they'll ask like very generic questions, but at least the fans, that are tapped in, this is their chance to kind of get their gut take on the roster, get them hyped up, and see what questions they have.
Yeah, and like you keep saying, you did a live stream. It was an AMA kind of thing. You walked through a lot of these topics. I didn't get a chance to watch the entire thing, but I did get atted on Twitter by everybody who wanted to let me know that Yaki wants revenge, and Kuki was disappointed that he couldn't mentor me more as a coach, and all sorts of different things from the meme questions that people were asking you guys as well. But I'm sure we're going to rehash some of that as well by getting your thoughts on the overall roster. What I wanted want to go a little more generic at the beginning as well, though, and kind of tap on some stuff that we've already touched on, which is the broad scale, just whiplash-inducing shift for the Florida Mayhem over the last year and a half, honestly. Because before you became the GM, it seemed like this franchise was the butt of many jokes in the Overwatch League. It had unfortunate performances in the past, the McDonald's colors, it was just a collection of unfortunate circumstances that required some pretty serious shifts. Has that been a large focus for you, as well as just putting the team together over the past year?
Yeah, I think just being cognizant where we came from. So like, obviously we were a bad team. And it doesn't make sense to forget that. Like, you can't just wipe that away, right? Like we've still been more of a bad team than a good team. If we have another good season, then we can say like, this is truly a new chapter. But there's still a lot of like PTSD from those days. And, it's part of my job to navigate those waters and kind of, reinvent the narrative, or like kind of reshape the narrative moving forward. So yeah, I put a lot of effort in it. I mean, I think at one point, the only person using Bring the Mayhem was Avast. Originally, nobody cared about us. And all of a sudden, like, we're like, wait, Avast is just tweeting Bring the Mayhem, and like, we're getting impressions. Like, what's going on here? And there was like, oh, it's because he just decided to name his chat of the match like segment with the hashtag. So then it was like, I saw what he was doing. I was like, wow, this is great. And then eventually, like this year, I started getting involved on the live stream as a guest, and just trying to, focus more on all the aspects. Like, I think every year is like time to improve. Like last year, we made it doesn't matter what we do. We need to have a good roster. So I focused on making sure the roster is good. This year, it's like, okay, I have a year under my belt, more experience. Like, let's start to work on the content side. Like, what can we make better? What part of the off seasons can we make better? How can I leverage like the talent that we have, like Swing Chip's unique talents, where she's not just, she's not simply a team manager. She does a lot more than that. And kind of letting her use those creative juices. Like, she's a creative at heart, honestly. And so when she came to me with the idea, just being able to facilitate it and guide it along and until it eventually became executed. So
and that's kind of cool, right? Because Swing Chip last year, I'd say, became a bit of a personality within the scene itself. She represented a lot of the content that came out of the Florida Mayhem, right? Because she would tweet out like, hey, this is what our players said in practice or behind the scenes, stuff like that, right? So now you actually gave her that platform to actually showcase her personality on stream. And I think that's some of what like the other teams and the franchises, they're perhaps sometimes afraid of giving people that platform to really showcase themselves and their personality. So I really thought it was awesome that you brought Swing Chip out there, and now she's more part of the team and the identity and all that. I wanted to ask you about the branding as well, like Sideshow mentioned. Is there anything you're really proud of when it comes to the branding and the content that you really put forth? Because I can imagine that the past few years you've learned a lot of lessons, and you've found some common themes like, hey, this is what we really should aim for. This is what we should push for more for on social media. What are some things you're really proud of when it comes to the branding and the content you're putting out as a team?
So branding, I can't really take credit for, but personally, when I joined the team back in the inaugural season, I already hated the colors. I've never liked the yellow, the McDonald's color scheme. Shout out McDonald's though, great company. But those colors were whack, and I've hated it since like the moment I've been on the team. And I was like, we need to change this. It just kind of fortuitous that when we finally got it approved, it also coincided with like a brand re-imaging. Sure. So like the colors changed, plus our team changed, and we got good. So it was just kind of like a really, I don't know, everything just kind of aligned last season in terms of the rebrand, and then the results came in. So everything just kind of aligned in terms of the branding aspect. But one thing I will say is I think people like creatives are much more excited to work on the new color scheme. Like, right, okay, we want, now we're like, we want retro, we want like vaporwave. Like there's so many things we can do with our colors. Whereas before it was like, it's yellow. Like what can we do? And then the best we come up, like we did the best we could with it. Like I think the comic strip idea, like in the second year, like that was pretty interesting and cool. But at the end of the day, it's like nobody's super excited. Like there's a few like niche people that are excited about wearing like a McMahon skin. But I think far more people are happier with the pink,
Yes.
the black.
All
I
right.
still rock the Winston skin, like the
you?
McDonald's Winston skin in game. Yeah, because it's
Nice.
iconic now. It's iconic. It's like nostalgia.
Limited edition.
It's
Yeah.
it's like how we view the 80s. That's how I view the old Florimeum skin. It's just
Okay,
like
very
this
good.
epic. They'll create some joke, funny movies about it in like 10 years or whatever. I think it's epic. It's part of history now. Forever ingrained
is.
as McDonald's Florimeum skin.
It's immortalized. All right,
It's
I want to
for
dig
diehard
in,
fans. Yeah.
I want to dig into some of the meat and potatoes of this offseason, though. So
Sure.
I want to start with the end of last season. So you finished 2020, the season this year. You're in 4th place in North America. You did pretty well. You finished pretty highly in the May Melee in particular. You guys did really well in that tournament. But overall, you guys were putting up some good results. How did you just candidly feel at the end of the season in terms of the roster rebuild and looking forwards to the offseason?
I think I had 2 regrets. One regret was not being able to win one of the monthly tournaments. It was unfortunate. I think because the first one we came didn't come close, but like we reached the finals, right? And we went to go against Shock. So like I was like, okay, like if that's how we start, like then I'm gonna be disappointed if we never actually reach the summit on any of these monthly tournaments, which is what ended up happening. We never made it as close. Like the first time was as close as we came the whole season. So that's one regret. And then the second one was not reaching the finals, the NA finals. At least getting a shot to go to Korea. Unfortunately, it was the perfect meta for DC. And we all know what happened. Like DC took out a ton of good teams.
Yeah.
Off the back of that meta. It was just a perfect storm for them in terms of their playoff run. And props to them for actually, pulling it off. Because I think going in, not many people believed that they could even do it. Like even though it was a good meta for them, like until they actually showed it. Like now, like hindsight, it's like, oh, of course, like DC, of course they're a good team. But like if you go back to like your feelings from the start of playoffs, like nobody had any faith in.
I had
DC
negative faith.
Negative
faith.
So yeah, those are my 2 regrets of the season. That I think we could have, hoped we could have done better.
Okay, so they're performance-based regrets, but it's not like you want to blow up the whole roster, right? You feel like you've still got a pretty stable foundation, but you still made quite a few changes in terms of players leaving and adding new pieces. So what was the thought process there in the, like, how you wanted to restructure the team? What's the ethos heading into 2021 with different pieces?
Yeah, so I think the basic premise was I wanted to look at our roster, and at each position, I wanted to say either we have a top 5 player at that position, or they have top 5 potential. And I think you look at our starting 6, or the first 6 that we signed, and it's there. I think there's top 5 potential at each of those, in all those players. And then when we picked up Checkmate, when we were looking at the 7th, I was like, hey, we've got 6 veteran players. Like they've all been playing Overwatch forever.
Yeah.
But I do like rookies because they bring in a new perspective. They bring in like that hunger. You don't really have. It's hard to find that hunger again. That like rookie year hunger. It's like very unique. And I think in Checkmate we found someone that like he doesn't come from like Overwatch royalty by any means, from like Korean contenders. Like he doesn't come from like a runaway, an Element Mystic, or like one of the elite farm teams from Korea. And so he really brings in that like underdog, like that grind, that dog mentality that I really like, and that aggression. And we were wildly successful with Gargoyle, even though he didn't have a year rookie campaign. Like honestly, last year, if you think about it, was really his rookie debut because he only played 1 stage for us. He didn't really. I mean, he's not a true rookie, but I'm saying like Gargoyle as well didn't really come from royalty in terms of like Korean contenders. And now I think they'd be considered getting up there, but at the time, he didn't really come from like a elite farm team. And I think I wanted to recapture some of that rookie magic, so to speak.
Yeah. So talking about rookies, then we might as well just speak about it now. Can you give any insight on how your trials were going into this offseason then? Like how you found Checkmate, and did you have your eyes on a few different candidates or him specifically? How did you go about the trials in the offseason? Yeah,
so the first 6 we solidified early on, signed. Within like a month and a half, we were finished, plus the renegotiation of Yaki's contract on a new 2+1. So once I got those out of the way, obviously re-signed Kuki as well. Then I was like, okay. Parallel to that, we were looking at our third DPS, but it was, I wanted to make sure the money was spent in the first 6. So that's where we spent the most money, and then the 7th, it was like, okay, we have the remaining budget. This is what we have to work with. Let's find someone that fits our budget. And so we're looking at a lot of players. We were also talking to, or not talking to, excuse, that's the wrong word, but we were looking at veteran players as well, and also talking to players. But then deals fell through, and then we're like, okay, we reached a point where we're like, okay, I think it makes sense to trial who we have left, and then at least get a ranking of who we think, because I think trial makes sense when you're not sure of the talent level of differing players. But prior to the trials, I was pretty sure, like, hey, these are like the standouts that we're gonna try to get. If we can't get them, then let's move to a trial phase. So that's kind of how we ended up at DPS only trials, and we had like 30 something applicants, and Checkmate, kind of rose to the top through a week of trials.
I think something, before we dig into more specifics on more players, I want to hit the general themes again. Some people might be concerned that you guys don't have backups for anything other than DPS right now. You guys have got a 6-man core roster plus Checkmate, who can, I would imagine, is more to do with rotating rather than being a pure backup. And a lot of teams in the league have previously had backup players or rotating players at the off-tank position, or actually the most common one right now seems to be flex support, because it seems likely at some point that there could be a double flex support meta, where a lot of the main support players, Slime included, haven't played a ton, at least that I've seen, of like your Zen, if there was a Zen Ana composition or something like that. What were your thoughts there in terms of only having 7 players on the roster for 2021, and do you think it's something that you're not worried about at all?
I'm not super worried about it. I also think with the talent we have on our roster, if our roster doesn't perfectly fit a meta, we're talented enough to play around the meta or play something, tertiary or adjacent to the meta, that will work better for us than just playing pure meta. If for some reason it doesn't turn out for us, so maybe Zen Ana. But I also think double flex support wasn't like the dominant meta throughout it like popped up, but I feel like there's a narrative that like we got to have 2 flex sports now. It's like, no, it was only like a month maybe at most where a total accumulated throughout the season where it was double flex support and people were really running it. So I'm not super worried, and I think Slime's good enough where if needed he can play. Like, for example, you look at Shock, right? Like Moth was playing Zen at one point, they still won. He didn't feel comfortable, but Shock still won with Moth on Zen. So it's not like main support's playing, main support's having a flex is going to be is going to be disastrous, right, by any means. And I think if you have the right main support, and Slime is a vet, like he's like 20 years old, which is crazy to think, but like, because I feel like he's been in the scene forever, but like he has a ton of experience, and I have full faith that he can play. We already know Ganonjin can play in here, and I have full faith that Slime can play in here. Yeah, need of him as well.
So talking a bit about the size of the roster then, before we get into specifics and individual players as well. I know that you're a great basketball fan. So maybe you've drawn some inspiration from that sport as well, approaching your general manager job. Like Sideshow said, you don't have the biggest roster. You only have a few individual players per each role. What do you feel about like role players when it comes to the Overwatch League, or maybe like players that don't have a starting spot but they're in the background? They can provide some perspective. I think we saw someone on the Washington Justice. Was it Roar? Yeah, it was Roar in the playoffs who didn't get a starting spot, but the coaches credited him because he was able to not have that starting spot, but still help massively, being able to provide his perspective. Sitting in scrims, etc. Given that you have a pretty small roster, but then you're a fan of the NBA, how do you approach role players when it comes to the Overwatch League? Do you think something could be gained from having extra players on your roster to provide that perspective? Or do you simply prefer having a minimal roster and let the players just focus on their own position?
So yeah, I mean, the NBA has players like Udonis Haslem, to make a Heat reference, right? Like he's not playing, but he has a contract every year, and his job is to motivate, like be the locker room glue. I think in general, I view role players as a luxury in Overwatch League. So like if you have the money to spend, and you're not skimping out on the rest of your roster, sure, like add a role player, add someone that's a vet, that's a leadership, maybe that provides like some intangibles, but I feel like that's always going to be a luxury. Whereas in the NBA, it's more like, like Udonis Haslem does not play like any minutes at all. Like he's just there to fire up the team, to give them speeches. And for me, like we have a head coach that used to be in that player coach capacity. And
Sure.
Yeah.
my opinion is like, why is he why is he even on a player contract then? Just make him the coach. Like what is he, if he's not playing and then, he's just coaching basically, like why not just make him coach? Like that just seems like, to me, when I see that, I think of like, okay, maybe they're trying to like help them come to grips with that transition. Like they see that trajectory and they're like, okay, like you're a player coach now. Like, hey, you're a player, you're on the bench. What's better than just saying you're a bench player? Oh, you're a player coach. Like that sounds better. Like that's a better way to phrase it, right? Like Kuki wasn't playing. Like it's like, okay, you're a player coach now. It's like, okay, that sounds good. Like sounds like he has some use on the roster besides just riding the pine, right?
Sure.
So that's kind of how I view it. It's a luxury. And if you can afford it, great. If not, then I'd rather focus on who's actually playing, who's going to be getting playtime.
Okay, we talked about Kuki there just for a second, but you guys have re-signed him throughout the end of 2022, I believe. That's right?
That's correct, yeah.
Which is the same as, at the moment, Yaki and Checkmate. They're all three of those are signed until the end of 2022.
Our entire roster, so we have team options. So our entire roster has team options or is guaranteed through 2022. So yeah, so we have this nice 2-season stretch where, this is our chance to contend. This is our chance to build something great. And I wanted to give them that kind of security, at least, especially for Kuki, who I think finding a good head coach in this league is hard. Finding a great one is even harder. And I think Kuki's definitely one of the greats. It's only been a year. Like crazy to think that last year was his rookie season as a head coach.
Sure.
But those are the facts. And I think we're only going to go up. And he's coaches improve like year over year. The more experience you have in this league, the more, there's no like rule book or there's no like textbook on like how to coach Overwatch. There's no, you can only learn through experience. So I think it's really important to have that security. So like you can experiment, and you feel empowered to make those decisions.
Kuki's got a whole new challenge, though, heading into this year, right? Because how I felt about the Florida Mayhem in the previous years was you'd barely kept anybody, really, from the previous roster. What was it? Only Sire Player and BQB in the previous offseason, I think?
No, we kept a lot last offseason.
Right, but in terms of, like, the actual starting roster, those were the other guys who actually... Well, I mean, it was only BQB that you were starting, right? Oh, Gargoyle as well, actually.
Yeah, Gargoyle, yeah.
Oh, and Fate.
And
no,
Chris.
what am I talking about? I totally forgot
Chris
about
too.
Fate.
No,
there was
what season are you talking about?
I don't know, man. I think
the
I've
first
got my...
one?
No, I think I've just got my brain twisted. Yeah, of course. No, you guys had a ton of people. You only added 2 rookies in Yaki and Ganamjit. Yeah, okay. All right. No, my brain's absolutely melting out in my body here. I do feel slightly different coming into next season, though, because you already have like a pre-existing core that you're working with that's already found success before, and you're not slotting in rookies this year. At least I don't think that you're going to be playing with Checkmate full time, and that's going to be something that's really making the biggest impact. To me, when I look at your roster, the biggest impact is actually going to be adding OG and Slime, because those are going to be full-time players played all the time in really crucial roles. The main tank and the main support are normally the roles that people want to be stable, and they kind of define the structure of a team a lot of the time too. How do you think your team is going to work with those challenges of integrating those new players? Because even if they're wonderful players, which we've seen in the past, those guys have been successful before, it's a different challenge to actually fit them into a pre-existing team.
Yeah, I mean, there's challenges, and I think we've started scrimming already with our roster. So we're getting an early start on kind of ironing out those kinks and getting people involved. They've been queuing together. And yeah, synergy, as you said, synergy can only develop through actually playing the game and playing together. But I think it really helps having a core. So last year, yes, we kept a lot of players, but this year, this is like the players that we kept have another season of Overwatch experience between them. So the core is a lot stronger. So it's much easier to integrate like 2 pieces into an existing core than just stitching together a bunch of like 6 new players that have never played together before. Because at least the four, they play together, they know each other, they know what they want to do, and the two players kind of slot in. And there's like an existing structure there that's worked for us. And so yeah, I think it's easier to slot in these two. And also I think for main support and main tank, you really want players that just play all the time at those roles. I think you start swapping, getting cute and trying to swap people out. You're messing with like synergies.
Sure.
And I think most people didn't really swap out their main support all that much last season. And main tank as well. Like I think unless it was like a very niche, like, wow, our main tank, like for example, for Shock, it's like Super's the best Reinhardt in the world. So of course, when we need to play Reinhardt, we're gonna have Super in, right? But Smurf plays everything else. And I think for us, we don't have the luxury of as I said, Shock has the luxury of being able to have players that are, stars in their role. Whereas for us, it's like, I just wanted a very solid, like a wide hero pool for each of the players on the roster.
I do still think that Sideshow has a point, though, with main support and main tank being two roles that are very important to the structure of the team and comes into play when it comes to the communication structure as well, and just being stable parts of the team as well. So did you actually try to integrate these two players into the team before you signed them? Did you have a chance to maybe play with the teammates before they actually got signed to the roster? In OG's case specifically, right? Did he play with Gargle? Did he try out how that synergy worked beforehand? Because OG is by far the most interesting signing in my opinion, because he's been around a few teams now. Again, basketball reference. I don't know if this is appropriate, but feels like a bit of like a Paul George kind of thing, where he's been on a few different roster and he's a bit ups and downs.
Furiously Googling Paul George.
Sorry.
I think a better comparison for OG and his trajectory would be Sato. Like, let's just say, like, I think.
Okay, that's interesting.
Don't know a basketball player called Sado, but I'm willing to run with you.
Sideshow, since Sideshow looked a little lost, I wanted
Thank you. I do appreciate that.
Right, give him a lob so that you can understand. So yeah, I'd say he's on. To me, it's plain to me to see the talent. And Kuki sees the talent as well. And the narrative has always been like he has the talent, but like
exactly.
And I think the one thing for main tanks, it's like, I think the public I think main tank's the hardest position to like understand what a good main tank looks like. Because everyone's like, I remember when we got Fate, like way back, like it was like, wow, he was on that 0-7 Valen team, like he's washed, like why are you getting Fate? And it's like, he's still a good main tank. Like there's different, he needs the right team, he's the right environment. And also this is his first all Korean roster.
Yeah. That is
great
a huge point.
So like he speaks great English, but end of the day, like it's not his native tongue. So it's like there's always going to be some sort of lag between what he wants to do and then translating it and then saying it and then doing it. Whereas now it's just like it's seamless. It's like, okay, I know what I want to do. I speak it in my native language and then we go. So there's no lag time between what he wants to do and what he says. And I think that's a big plus. Just everyone speaking the same language, speaking their native language, and yeah, I think this is the most talented roster he's played with in his career as well. So yes. I think that helps.
Yes, I definitely agree with that. But I think the do you have specific plans for developing OG? Are there things that you want to do to make sure that this guy actually succeeds?
Yeah, our head coach is a former main tank player, so I think that's helps a lot. I don't think there's many head coach it's seeing things from a main tank perspective. I'm sure Johnny can talk about this, but it's different than other positions because you're in the front. You can always see what's behind you, but you have to
notorious for that, forgetting about what was behind me. Yeah,
like in your head, you have to you're also thinking behind you without looking behind you. You're like, okay, I think my flex sport's here. Like, where can I get heals? There's so much calculus or that you have to do in your head, trigonometry to figure out like where you can go, where you can get heals, what you can do, and diving with your team. So understanding those intricacies is something I think a lot of head coaches, like when you're trying to improve a main tank, like there's some things that unless you're a main tank player, you can't give advice on, or like advice just like doesn't make sense. Like if like a normal coach that hasn't played main tank is giving like specific main tank advice, sometimes the advice is like, how do you expect me to do that? Like, that doesn't make any sense what you just said. Like, I can't possibly, have a 360 mapping of the entire battlefield, right? And I think advice Kuki gives is going to be very nuanced and very specific. And Kuki's played at the highest level as well. Like he was an AOE main tank, so he knows what it takes. And I think if anyone in the league could coach OG to be a better player or to unlock his potential, I think it's going to be Kuki.
Yeah. I'm very excited to see that. Taking a bit of a step back though, because I've already tweeted this out, and you liked the tweet, so you saw what my concerns were. Obviously, I think Fate was a big part of last year for that team as well. Fate has always been a very vocal player, right? He's been a bit of a leader. Same went for his time on Valiant as well, right? So now Fate moves over to the Shanghai Dragons, and you had to fill that vacant spot on your roster. What were some of the things you were looking for in a main tank across the board to fill his void? What were some of the important traits that Fate brought to the team that you now face challenges of replacing going into next year?
So I think the hardest part would probably be finding someone. He played mostly Orisa for us, That's how it worked out this season. He played a lot of horse. But in general, Fate, his strengths are he can play every single main tank you want. So I wanted a replacement for Fate to also be, hey, we can trust this guy to run any meta. Mm-hmm. And I actually think OG has off tanks in his hero pool as well that he can play at an AOE level. Mm-hmm. And I don't necessarily not knocking Fate. I don't think many main tanks have that off tank flexibility. It's hard. Yeah. There's already so many main tanks you have to play, and adding off tanks to that hero pool is that's just an extra bonus. But I think OG is one of those few main tanks that has that in his pool. He could play Sigma, he could play Hog. I've also seen him whip out Diva. I haven't really seen a Zarya, but we have Gargle, so I think we're set on.
It would be a weird meta where OG had to play Zarya. Yeah. I mean, I'm not saying it couldn't happen, but it would be weird.
So I think finding someone that can fill all those needs in terms of, because I don't want to be in a situation where it's okay, we can't play a certain hero because they're just not good enough at it. You could say Orisa was a weak point, but I think if Orisa is your weak point as a main tank, that's the easiest thing to fix. How Orisa's not mechanically difficult. It's just hey, you need to do this pull better or better shield management. It's much more simple to coach someone on Orisa, and I think that's obviously OG struggle a little bit on Orisa, but I think that's much more easier to fix than any of the other main tanks.
Yeah, it's a great point that you bring up about the development of OG as well. I think that while I believed last year was really going to be where OG shined, there were just so many difficulties within that team that he never fulfilled his potential. But I still feel the same about OG as I did last year, almost exactly 1 year ago, which is he is a guy with a shit ton of potential that just needs the right team to be able to actually realize it and fulfill it. And I can't think of a better team for him to go to other than I don't know, the Shock or something than the new guys, because it just makes perfect sense having him be coached by Kuki. It just literally all of the things line up. And it's not necessarily, in my opinion, that Kuki's a better main tank than OG, so can teach him. It's just the value of alternate perspectives and someone with experience in the role. I know that from talking to a lot of players in the league who play main tank, that main tank coaching is not at a high level in OWL. It's not something where it's easily developed. It's on the player most of the time to actually develop themselves, and you can help with the rest of the team and talking to the rest of the team and that kind of stuff, but it's rare that you find someone that can specifically do the positional coaching where they're coaching you to be better at your role when it comes to main tank. It's more of the kind of interactions with the rest of the team. So I'm really excited to see what you're able to do with OG. I think it's still a risky pickup because he hasn't performed at a top, in terms of his teamwork and being able to actually synergize with the roster. He hasn't been able to do it yet. So it feels risky to me when I look at you guys and you don't have the leadership of Fate and you have somebody who seems to be a good bet, but if it goes wrong, there's no backup. I can see a lot of risk also involved, but high reward.
I feel like he's been the scapegoat for all his teams.
Okay.
And that's only because he left. I feel like if he stayed, people would be less, because people are oh, he left. So it's I think there's this impression that Glads didn't want him back. It's no, Glads actively wanted him back. Just they didn't want to option him. They wanted to renegotiate the contract, but then that made OG a free agent, and that's where we got involved.
Right.
So it's like, and Deepe's talked about this as well. Like he wanted OG back. It's not like they're like, oh, we're done with you. Like, you know, we're gonna get someone better. It's like we just wanted to renegotiate the contract, and you know, if you want to stay, you know, there's a spot for you. But then OG, you know, we came in, we swooped in with an offer that he thought, you know, he thought he could do better on a Korean team, and do better with us. So that's the circumstance. Well, I feel like.
You guys played against the Gladiators many times last year. It was one of like the largest mid-table rivalries, to be honest. You guys were fighting for that spot towards the end of the season to be able to get the ranking to go into playoffs. So you've had the opportunity to go toe-to-toe with OG many times. If you don't, if you believe he was the scapegoat, what was your perspective on like the actual issues with the team and the way that OG was playing last year?
All I'll say is I don't think it was OG's fault. I obviously I'm biased, but you know I'm not going to throw any players under the bus. But I think there were other people that weren't stepping up on that team, and you know I'm just going to leave it at that. That's okay. Yeah. I don't like talking bad about players.
Right. But it's your perspective that when you played against them and looked at the games, that it was OG being let down by his teammates more so than OG's failures himself, which led to you guys feeling good about picking him up in this offseason.
Yeah, I think
is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think his personal performance, I think, was fine. Like I think the reason why they lost wasn't because he had terrible performances. I think just there were some aspects that were missing from that team. There were some weaknesses on the team that they couldn't fix. Like they were playing mirror they were playing mirror at like 3 roles at one point, right? Like there's some sort of like there's some sort of issue going on that they're trying to some sort of kink that they're trying to massage out that they never really got to that like the core issue, or they weren't able to find that tweak to bring them over the edge where on paper they were a strong team on paper. I think it just goes to show like games aren't won on paper, right? Like games aren't won by the names you're signed. Like you don't win in the off season, you win in the server. So yeah, I mean that's what I think of the Gladiators. I think they were a great team on paper. Didn't work out. There seemed to be a lot of they were trying to move Mirror to as a stopgap. I'm not sure which problem they're trying to solve because it seemed like there was 3 different problems and 3 different roles that they're trying to figure out. So I think that's what I think of the Gladiators.
I also don't think you can knock the Gladiators too much for actually doing the efforts they did last year, because I think it's an interesting conversation we're having right now where we're talking about your team today and the announcements you've made. And the feeling I'm getting when I see your announcements the past 2 years is the Florida Mayhem is a team that has actually built a great foundation moving forward. You've signed Kugina to a long-term contract. You have Checkmate and Yaki on pretty long contracts. I mean, 2+1s. I'd say that's I mean, that's above the norm in the Overwatch League for sure, right? So you got a great foundation now, and now you're capitalizing on that. You want to secure that foundation and then build championships on top of that, right? Well, the Gladiators, they're still looking for that foundation, I would say. Season 1, Season 2, they were pretty solid. They had like the finished backline duo, but last year it felt like they dove a bit deeper. They're trying to found that foundation. They're getting a lot of new talent. Kevster came in as well, like a bit of a new addition to that team, and they're trying to found this foundation so they can then build that out and build an identity with that. And so you have a lot of pieces that are a bit all over the place. I think OG was one of those pieces, who we all know is a very talented player, but really wasn't a great fit on that team. And that was my big takeaway from this season as well, where I said that, hey, OG on a full Korean team, I think that is way better for his career. And I think now they're moving some pieces as well going into next season. So I think it's interesting that you built a great foundation. It is not anywhere close to the LA Gladiators, but you've built a great foundation. And now you're saying, hey, OG, that's a piece that could fit our team and our build. And this is a player that we want for us, right? So I think it's very interesting that it's a cool comparison with the Gladiators, because they're looking for a foundation while you've got a great team going and you're taking one of their pieces.
Yeah, I think it's really cool.
I'm very excited for our match against the Glads. I think they've put together a great roster.
They have.
On paper, it is a very sick roster.
It's another scary on paper roster, isn't it?
They've got a very good roster, and they have another support duo like Moth and Shu. from Toronto Esports
Yeah.
for any fans that
Yes.
actually watched all the way back then, and watched like tier 2, tier 3 Overwatch. But yeah, very old, old buddies getting back together. You always like to see it. So yeah, I'm very excited for those matches.
The only other component we haven't talked about when it comes to the main tank position, at least as far as I can tell, is Fate's shot calling, like the actual leadership component. As far as I'm aware, that's not something that OG has brought to prior teams. Could be wrong here, but I have never heard people talking about OG as if he's a big vocal leader within the team, whereas that has always been the running narrative with Fate. Is there some kind of direct a process during this offseason in the scrimming time to transfer that role to somebody else? Were there already leaders in the team that we weren't aware of from the outside? What's the situation there?
So actually, Kuki likes a more democratic style of calling and shot calling. And I think he wants every player to be able to make that call when they see it. So if you're Lucio and you have amp and you can amp the team and they're in a position where you can rush someone down, like that's your job to do that shot call, because no one else, the main tank shouldn't be calling for speed boost, right? I mean, sometimes the main tank should, but there, if you have it as a Lucio and you see an opportunity, you should feel free to call it, and not be like, oh, Fate's the shot caller, or OG is the shot caller. Like, let's just wait for him to make that call, and let's put it all on him. So I think distributing the load, the shot calling, the calling load amongst the team, is important. And like, if you have a DPS, like if you're a Genji and you have Blade, and you should be the one calling for the nano blade, right? It shouldn't be whoever you decide is the shot caller to be calling the nano blade engage. Like, that's your responsibility to call it. And it's just more efficient that way, and it kind of flows, because when you're in a position to play make, and you should trust your team, and the team should trust your judgment in those situations that you see an opportunity, and let's do it. And it's much faster. And I think the best teams do that, and that's how they can react so fast. So yeah, I think it's not necessary that, and I've listened to the scrims, I've listened in on comms, and OG is definitely not a silent guy by any means. And I don't think that that's going to be an issue. I don't think the comms or the lack of shot calling is going to be an issue for this team.
Yeah. I think it's interesting you bring up that Kuki has more of a democratic process of doing his shot calling as well, because I actually tend to agree with that. I've been at fault sometimes because I've been saying like, hey, main tank should be shot calling, and then you have main support, taking care of the ultimates whatsoever. But I think it's a bit more of like what is the phrase I'm looking for here? Like, crawl before you walk kind of scenario, where sometimes you have pretty bad teams that don't have any teamwork whatsoever. They can't get on the same page, no kind of leadership. That's where you maybe want your main tank and your main support to provide some kind of structure that the team can build into. But then when you're going to be fighting with the likes of the San Francisco Shock or the Philadelphia Fusion, Shanghai Dragons, these teams are so free-flowing when it comes to top-tier mechanics that you cannot really have a main tank think for like 2 seconds about what their DPS should do, what their support should do, because then your main tank will be outmaneuvered by the opponent main tank, because they don't have to think about what their team is doing. They know what the rest of their team is doing, right? So your main tank is really slowed down by having to shot call for the rest of the team. So what you mentioned there about Kuki, favoring the democratic shot calling, I think that really shows that he has aspirations to really be a top tier championship team. And yeah, it might look a bit iffy at times, because you will have those scenarios where OG will, without hesitation, just dive in because he sees something and he trusts his teammates to back him up. But maybe Gargoyle isn't there. Maybe he's off thinking about doing something else, right? Sometimes it looks kind of wacky when you have that shot calling structure, but when you really nail it, that's when you become a championship team. So I'm really excited to see if you can grow into that shot calling structure and see how the team chemistry forms around that shot calling structure.
I mean, I'm back on top of shot callers. I think back in the day when like people were like, okay, we need this guy's the main shot caller. It's usually because there's probably somebody on that team that you just didn't like. We've all played on teams, right? That there's one person on the team that makes the worst fucking calls, and you're just like, oh, you don't listen. Like when you do not do what he says, like listen to what a shot caller says, because his ideas are always whack. Like he just feeds, right? And we've all played with teammates like that, and I think that's when it's necessary to be like, okay, we have a structure in place, so it's not like, so it's like you listen to this guy's shot call. This guy has like veto authority because you're one person, or like maybe you have multiple people that have like bad reads on the game. But then eventually when you get to the top level and then you have 6 players, like you need to turn. Like I think a big factor in winning L matches consistently is the ability to turn fights when you're down 1 or 2 players. And when you're down 1 or 2 players, if one of them hands me a shot color, like you're not gonna win because like
Yeah.
they're calling from the grave, like they're calling from spawn, like they don't actually know what's going on in real time. But if you have 6 people and every single one of them is empowered to make shot calls, that's no problem. It's like, okay, I've got this big ult, let's combo, winnable, like let's do it, right? And it's just like super quick.
Overwatch also just happens at such a fast pace that I think the teams where you have a decentralized calling structure tend to perform better. I think it's a little outdated, the idea of having a central IGL. I also think that teams tend to benefit from having a leadership figure that they can kind of turn to that's maybe not the main caller in all of the situations, but somebody who's going to get them back on track if they're in a difficult situation, or someone that people can turn to when things are getting weird, that's going to make sure that they get back to playing like they're in a serious match environment, which I had assumed was going to be Fate, but you guys also have a ton of vets on your team now.
Right. Yeah, so I think Slime is actually the cool calm and collected one. Like he's like very stable, like when he's calling, like he doesn't like, he's not screaming like crazy stuff when it gets hype. He kind of has like an even keel when it comes to comms. So I think he'll kind of be like the more calming presence, like, hey, like, you know, this is, you always know what you're going to get out of him. Like he's not going to get too high, he's not going to get too low. So I think, you know, from where I stand right now, I think it's probably Slime that's going to be like a calming presence on the team.
We haven't talked too much about Slime, but he is, I mean, on paper, that's the largest upgrade you guys have made across the offseason, in my opinion, is going from Chris to Slime. Not that I thought Chris was bad. I thought that he had actually got to a level where he was contributing really positively to your team. But there's a difference between that level and Slime, who had legitimately an argument for being the best main support in 2019 when he was playing with the Vancouver Titans, and has had performances in the past where you would have that same kind of opinion of him. So that to me is a massive upgrade and one that fans should be extremely excited about. Was that just an instant lock for you as you came into the offseason as soon as you realized that he was available?
Yeah, so we wanted him last season, actually. So when the Titans exploded, if you remember that.
Yeah.
What do you mean if you remember that? Yeah, everyone remembers that. But,
everyone remembers that momentous occasion.
Yeah,
like Krakatoa-esque explosion in the Overwatch scene.
Yeah, like it was what's the highest magnitude earthquake? But yeah, like the tremors were like just throughout the league, you know, like they all went. Twilight ended up on the shock, and like it's like, you know. Anyways, so Slime, we offered, like, we were like, hey, like this is a player that we want to pick up last season, and we offered him a contract, like, hey, come play for us. But you know, I think he had his own reasons for going with Seoul. Probably, you know, there's a pandemic. He just has to go back to his hometown. He's playing for the hometown team. So I think Seoul made a lot of sense for him at the time. So I don't hold it against him. And then, but you know, come this offseason, when I found out Seoul was releasing him and he also didn't get playtime with Seoul, I was like, hey, like, come to us. You know, like, here's an offer, like, you're gonna start. You know, we try to get you last season, like, we're still interested. You're our number one priority. Like, we made him our number one priority for main support, and he had other options as well that he was talking to. But you know, ultimately he thought, you know, we were the best landing spot for him.
So obviously he's not here, so I can't ask him. But have you had any interactions with him, perhaps with Swing Chip, and going to hear his takes on like how he is excited to join this team? Like, what is he excited about when it comes to joining the Florida Mayhem and his position within the team?
So I haven't had too many of those conversations myself. It's kind of been,
which is fair, a bit of an oddball question, but still.
I've been playing a lot of Cyberpunk. Like, no, I'm just kidding. No, he's in Korea. You know, I haven't had a chance to meet him in person yet. But you know, I'm sure we'll have tons of those conversations when, you know, we actually start doing preseason activities and they actually report. You know, they actually report in Florida. So hopefully, you know, next year we'll have some more detailed one-on-one conversations. But yeah, I mean, it's been a blur of me negotiating. We talked a lot. You know, myself, Kuki, Swing Chip, you know, we're in those calls. She was translating, obviously, and then we were, we made our pitches to him over the course of, you know, many calls, or not many calls, but several calls. We kind of pitched it, you know, our vision. Kuki told him like how he was going to coach him, how he's going to utilize him. And And yeah, so like we've had those talks. I think Kuki more so than me. I think Kuki's the more important facet of that because he's the one that's going to be controlling like the day-to-day environment of the team and how they look, how Slime's playing, how he's adjusting. So they've had more conversation than I've had with him. Mine were mostly centered around, the numbers and the contract and everything.
Yeah. I would imagine that Slime is excited to play as well. It was a surprise to everybody that he wasn't actually fielded that much in the Seoul Dynasty.
Yeah, I mean, everyone knows like the Toby meme, right? Where he just eats, he eats up the support that's supposed to that was sent there to play somewhere. Yeah, that's narrative, right? But I think, I don't think that's a knock on Slime. Like, I think Slime had a really, and I think part of it, he probably realizes that, like, because when we pitched him last year, we were like, okay, you're probably going to have significant time if you come to us. And like one of our things is like, they have Toby already. Like, what, there's a good chance. And it's tough. Like, midseason, it's tough to replace player synergy. Because Toby had half a year or longer of synergy with the Seoul core, and Slime's coming in, and you expect him to slot in when Seoul were like middle of the pack. And like they didn't have too much area to experiment because they still needed to maintain their position and win as many games as possible or try to win as many games as possible. So I think it was, I don't think it's like a travesty that he wasn't, there's definitely reasons on Seoul's side for not playing him, but I don't think that's a knock on him as a player. I think just more a fact that, there's team synergy that has existed on Seoul for a long time. Like Toby's been a staple of that team for, since the inaugural season, right? So it's hard to...
Yeah, I was going to say, I think it would be crazy for anybody to think that Slime has deteriorated since the last time he played. Like, if you don't believe this guy's still going to be up at the top of the league, I think you're a little wild.
Yeah, and on that vein as well, I think that when it comes to main tank and main support, I think that you really have to find a team that fits your style and fits, the player fits into the team, right? And that is what is so impressive about all the signings you've made this past offseason, where it does make a lot of sense. I mean, we're talking about OG and we're like, well, actually, Florida Mayhem, with Kuki as a coach, actually makes a ton of sense. And this could be a spot where OG could thrive, right? And I feel the same way about Slime here. It's a signing that made so much sense on this team. It's a player that didn't get as much playtime on Seoul Dynasty and just slots perfectly into the Florida Mayhem. So I'm very impressed by how these players just perfect what you need going into next season and see if it pays dividends.
Yeah, one thing Slime asked me actually when we were negotiating was like, hey, like, are there any clicks I need to be worried about? So I think that's honestly that's a part, like that's like a veteran question.
Yeah, totally.
Players generally don't think about like, hey, like, are there any clicks? Because the social aspect of a team does actually eventually like impacts how you play and if you play, depending on how depending on the team politics. So, and I think on our side, like we're not super clicky. I think everyone gets along. Everyone's like really nice to each other. Everyone interacts with each other a lot. So yeah, like the first thing I was like, we don't have any clicks. There's no clicks here that are going to prevent you from playing, or like he didn't want to feel like an outsider, right? Because I think that's for a veteran joining a team, an existing core. It's like, am I just like the mercenary that they rented, right? Am I just someone that they play in the server with, but like they don't, you're just here to help us win games, and then, but like we're the core of the franchise, right?
I can see fans not understanding this this question as well, because if you have never played in a team environment, you might just assume that all teams are just friends. They're just a group and you hang around in that group. But the bigger a group gets, the more it subdivides into cliques a lot of the time, especially if you have like different nationalities and cultures involved, different languages that are spoken as well. It can become real cliquey. Also, back in the day as well, before Overwatch League was a thing, though I'm sure this is also a thing in multiple Overwatch League teams, you'd have one segment of the team that believes the game should be played one way and one segment of the team that believes the game should be played other way, and it literally tore teams apart in early Overwatch. And I'm sure it affects some of the less well-performing teams too. So it's for anyone who hasn't played at a high level or doesn't understand team dynamics at a high level in any sport or esport, it really is it's like a very common trap that you can fall into for a team environment to have those a very cliquey feel. So that's really interesting that Slime was aware of that as well.
And it's hard to kind of articulate that feeling too. Like not many players can articulate like, wow, I feel this way because like, there's a click, or like there's a click involved. Cause like if you think someone has a negative perception of you, or you think someone doesn't like you, it impacts how you view like their messages, how they calm in the game. Like it adds like some context behind the tone, or like you read into things more than you would if you're like, okay, like, you know, I trust this player, like we're good friends, like, you know, that's a joke, right? Like sometimes, you know, things get miscommunicated, things get misconstrued based on, you know, clickiness. Like it definitely impacts things. But I think a big reason why we got through COVID with, you know, like we had our issues with COVID, but for the most part, like we were able to power through it. You know, it was hard for them, but I don't think I think it would have been much harder if we were like clicky environment, and then it's like, okay, you just want to scream because like you're only friends with like 2 people on the team, and like everyone else on the team is in their own like little bubble. So yeah.
Yeah. Do you think you've been part of the Overwatch scene for a long time now, even since the inception, right? Like you were part of the early days, 2015, 2016. Am I correct?
Yeah, I mean, not in a significant capacity, but yeah, I was around. Yeah,
you were around. Yeah, sure.
I was around.
Yeah. So have you sort of seen a shift in maturity when it comes to these players? Like, obviously, we can talk about how the gameplay has improved massively, and also like the franchising now with the Overwatch League obviously started like halfway in the lifespan of Overwatch, right? But have you seen, when it comes to the players, have you seen a different approach in maturity when it comes to being part of a team, taking consideration for other players? Like we mentioned Slime in this scenario when he asked about clicks, and, you know, but he's very aware of clicks being part of teams and like how he should approach teams as a leader. Have you seen players and even rookies coming in from contenders? Are they more mature when it comes to being part of a team in that way? Or would you say it's, you know, still reminiscent of 2016, 2017, where you bring in a player and have to introduce them to a system and sort of like bring them up in that sense?
I think rookies are always going to be rookies. There's really nothing that compares to Al. Even if you're from like an elite team from Korea or, you know, anywhere in the world, it's much different when you reach Al. It's just a different pace, different. The contracts are different. Your living conditions are wildly different. Your responsibilities are, you know, you have a lot more responsibilities as an Al player than you do as a Contenders player. So I think rookies will always be rookies, but I think the vets, they've definitely like matured. They're not the same vets. Like each year, there's a different level of maturity. I'll say they've gotten better at negotiating contracts. That you learn. You learn as a player. You know, maybe the first 2 contracts, you know, it's like, oh crap, like I should have asked for this, or like, you know, this is important to me in a contract. But I definitely noticed, like, even with the players that have been with us the entire time, like they've gotten savvier at, you know, what they want out of their contract and how they want to, you know, they have an idea of like how they want to be incentivized. And so yeah, I think in terms of, you know, definitely in the financial sense, they've matured, and they've started to understand like the responsibilities, right? Like, you know, why do I have to stream, or like why do I need a social? I think the social part's the hardest, and we're gonna work on this year. I think you know, I think just GGs and then at whatever team, you know, I'll try to phase that away this year. But I think that's like the biggest social media issue with Korean players, is that's all they use Twitter for. Like they're all verified, and all they use it for is GGs at whatever team they just beat, or, you know, I'm sorry, GGs. And then like that's it. That's all they use Twitter for. So hopefully get them to explore that side of their brand.
Because I know Yaki is spicy. Yaki in the game, and Yaki whenever he's in interviews has got spice to just dish out across the board.
Yeah, and then you look at his Twitter and you would never know. It's just GGs at whatever team, or like, thank you for MVP vote. It's like, you know, we got to do more. You know, you can do so much more because you do more. Like he was essentially the spokesperson. Like, I mean, he was MVP of the match like so many times last year that, you know, Al just always asking to interview him. But yeah, so just kind of letting out, you know, getting them to grow their own Twitters more. I think having Swing Chip as a release valve helps a lot in terms of getting people to know the personalities. But that's still not through, you know, their own words. I mean, it's through their own words, but just via proxy instead of just, you know, direct.
I wanted to ask you a little bit about, you keep mentioning the fact that when we're in Florida, etc., you guys have confirmed that you're playing in NA. That was one of the clips that I saw from the stream that you just watched as well, which might not seem like that might seem like a bit of non-news to people who haven't been following, but Fusion, for example, just announced that they are moving to APAC. And I'm anticipating announcements from other teams, perhaps, saying that they are shifting locations as well, although not all of them have announced those kind of things. So what's the thought process there? You have a full Korean team, but you want to play in North America and represent Florida in North America for next year. What's the kind of logistical thought process behind that decision?
Well, I think it's just we have infrastructure here. Like we rented out the team apartments for 2-year leases. So we still have that. We're in the second year. We have a new facility. We have a new like headquarters that we built for the Overwatch team. For not just Overwatch team, but there is like an Overwatch section of the headquarters. And it's brand new. The facility's awesome. Like it's 18,000 square foot. It's huge. So we have all this infrastructure here in Florida. And as I said last year, like when our players were like, hey, like all these teams are moving to Florida, I was like, you know, like, okay, like here's the situation. Like we might be able to move to Florida, but that also requires a ton of logistics on our end and a lot of investment. And it's just not gonna be the same. Like we can't provide you a facility. You know, it's probably just gonna be you're gonna be back in like contenders-esque conditions where you're in like a team house and you might not have a practice facility. Like it's just hard for like we're not built to set up, you know, something like that in Korea at the moment. And we'd rather not when we have so much infrastructure in Florida. And if we can do that in a safe manner, like last year we had 0 COVID cases. We had the team in Florida the entire time. And as I said on stream, like we're looking at doing it in the safest way possible. We're talking to Blizzard, seeing if we can get like secure vaccines for them, so they can get administered in Korea, be vaccinated before they get on a plane.
Right.
So do it in the safest way possible, in the most feasible way possible. So I think that's our current plan. That's the way we're looking at it. We just can't support them the same way in Korea that we can, you know, out of our home base in Florida.
Do you think there is some kind of competitive aspect or benefit of going to Korea these days? Because obviously, if you compare both regions last year, one could argue that the APAC region was slightly stronger, although I wouldn't say by much, because obviously you have teams in North America like Boston Uprising, Houston Outlaws, that didn't really live up to potential. And, you know, they're sort of bottom teams, Washington Justice for the most part, right? And then in APAC, you have stable competition, all like pretty mediocre teams. And then there's some top teams in that mix, right? So overall, it's a better competitive region, I would say. But do you think there is a big advantage of going to APAC? Because I would actually argue that now you're looking at the North American region, you have teams like San Francisco Shock, Dallas Fuel as well. Like it feels way more even, because when I think back to 2017 and those years, it's right, oh my god, Korea is the hotspot. You know, you got all these Apex teams, there's so much skill. If you want to become better at Overwatch, Korea is the place to be, right? But now I feel going into next year, there's not a big competitive advantage going to Korea. Sure, you're going to be practicing as the Shanghai Dragons. You might have some contenders teams that really pop off or are good practice partners. But for the most part, it feels way more even. So is that like a thing that you're sort of not thinking about as much? Can you like find great competition in North America? Is that a thing you think about at all when it comes to making these decisions?
I mean, as long as there's still OWL teams in the NA region, there's always going to be scrim partners. And I think that's always, in any region, those are going to be your first choice of scrim partners. And then after that, you start looking contenders teams. But I also think the NA meta was, I really wanted to see the NA meta clash against like the KR meta, but they ended up on the same meta in playoffs. And maybe that's just what always would end up happening. But I like the differences in styles. But I also think NA was, I think at least the meta comps in NA would have been the comps they're running in Korea. Because Korea was very divey, very Sombra heavy, and NA was like bunker or like double shield heavy. And I really do think double shield's better than at the, you know, if you put those head to head, because in NA we did try to run that, but it just doesn't work. I think there's more diversity in terms of playstyle in North America, whereas in APAC it just seems like Chengdu's like the outlier, and everyone else just plays the same shit.
Yeah.
But I also think with the signing of Gaga, it seems like they're much they're much more willing to play ball with the current meta as well. So like maybe Chengdu just plays meta next year. I have no idea. But they have that capability. I don't think they're just, I think the Chengdu as we know it, like, where they're just like the meta deniers, so to speak. That possibly could change.
Okay.
I'd hate to see that.
I would
think
hate
they
to
should
see
just
that as well.
remain Chengdu. We need them. They're
Till the end of time.
Or maybe
Yeah,
God just runs
absolutely.
the ball. He just replaces
double
Amen.
ball comp. Yeah, I hope they really. I mean, they've got their old coach back as well that tended to lean heavily into the meme comps, or not meme comps. I shouldn't call them that, but like really weird compositions that no one else was running that work well on their strengths. I want to talk to you a bit about your competition in North America then, because here's a good way of putting this. I am currently running on the assumption that all of the teams that were playing in North America are still playing in North America, right? So I know that there's some like Xe was talking about come to Korea and we'll smack you around or something like that. So now people on Reddit are kind of hypothesizing that Dallas are moving over. I am working under the assumption that NA teams are in NA. So when I talk to you about your competition, I'm thinking all of the ones that would classically be North American based, other than Philly, who have already confirmed that they're moving over to APAC.
Yeah.
Where do you guys see yourselves in terms of the competition in 2021? Because personally, I think that although your team looks arguably better than it did last season, depending on how OG goes, but if we assume that goes well, then you guys look considerably stronger, actually, than you did last year. But I think it would be remiss if we didn't point out that there are a lot of other teams in North America that have paid some big money and got some big teams coming into next year. The competition looks more stacked than ever.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that I love about the Overwatch League is it's gotten more competitive every year.
Yeah.
And I think even though, the player base, people are talking about the player base and like rank takes, forever to find matches. I think the actual top level, it's, there's still a lot of talent. There's new talent being injected in the league every year. People that can't keep up are getting phased out. The new talent, the fresh blood is like incredible. Like last year's MVP, I mean, not MVP, the rookie class was just stacked.
Unbelievable.
Like what other league do you have rookies coming in and getting MVP nominations? Like that's unheard of, right?
Yeah.
Like that doesn't happen in any other sport, any other esport, I don't think. But yeah, so like these rookies coming in are great. And yeah, as you said, it's stacked. I think, we're excited. Philly, who was a top team wait, you said Philly, all right, hold on.
Yes.
I'm trying to make sure I don't leak anything.
Philadelphia have announced that they're moving to APAC.
Okay, Philly's officially announced. But yeah, one of the top teams from last season moving on to APAC. So obviously that makes it a little easier to be top 4 again. But I think, I think the goal is still I want to be top 2 in NA this year.
Okay.
Because I don't know how playoffs are going to be this year, but if it's judged the same as last year's 2 from each region, so you need to be top 2 to reach the final 4. So I think in my head that's kind of like where I want our team to be. And I think, we have the top 2 potential. It's just a question of, can we get there? Can we continue to grow as a team throughout the season and peak at playoffs? Instead of whereas, last year we peaked the first month of tournament, right? Because we didn't reach that height again. So in my head, that's kind of, I want like a steady trajectory and then peaking the playoffs. Because, it doesn't really matter if you peak any other time in the season.
So obviously you have some insider information that we cannot get out of you, but I'll poke a bit because I respect your opinion as such on the presumption that you know more than potentially me and Sideshow here. So do you have any team in any of the regions that you're like most excited about to see next year? Obviously Dallas Fuel made big overarching changes, so that's like the easy answer, right? Like, oh my god, Dallas Fuel, they're so amazing, so many new signings. But is there any team that like maybe an underdog or a team that intrigues you going into 2021 that you're excited to see, perhaps as a fan of the league or compete against?
I think Boston is pretty interesting.
Oh, I mean, that's the spice immediately right there.
I think Boston's I'm not saying they're going to be a top team,
right?
But I don't think there's any way they're 20th again.
Yes. Okay. I agree with that.
All right.
And I think it just remains to be seen because I've had experience with, being on historically bad teams or 20th place teams, and there's a lot to unlearn. So the question is, first of all, are they fielding anyone from that like 20th place team? Well, they are, right? Myeongbong. But it's like, can they learn how to win again? And can they, because it took us a while, and I think a big part of that was just getting rid of old habits. So our last season, right, it got off to a very slow start. People were like, oh, like there is the same old mayhem. But we played really strong teams. But it took us a while to get our confidence back up and start making those plays again. Those like plays that a winning team would make or a strong team would make. So I think that's just like I don't want to say it's morbid curiosity, but just curiosity from my perspective, just from being in the same place.
All right, yeah.
But in terms of like very, very good teams that I like to play against, definitely Glads. I think they like on paper they're a stacked team, and Dallas, of course. So those two, and then Shock's the cop-out answer. Everyone knows Shock's the team to beat. But I'm sure Owl will run that narrative into the ground, so I don't need to give them any more.
Yeah,
of course they already have.
I also, when I look at your team as well, I feel like I'm gonna underrate you guys compared to where you're gonna rate yourselves. I feel like I'm gonna do that for all of the teams in the league as well, because every team believes that they're gonna be competing right up at the top there. But to me, your team, I personally think that the level of competition next year is so massive. He's run away. He can't handle the truth.
No.
He has speakers on. He can hear us.
I know. I personally think that the level of competition next year is so massive that you guys could still become a much better team and still finish fourth the same way that you did last year. I think that is a reasonable outcome for honestly any team. Like they could make massive improvements and still finish in what would be considered like underwhelming spots compared to what they would really want from the team. What I'm thinking about as well is the teams that like might trip up people like you and Gladiators along the way in trying to get back to that top 4, top 5, or maybe even top 2 position. I'm thinking about teams like Toronto and teams like Houston, people that have got like developmental rosters that are trying to punch well above their weight from previous years. How do you feel about those teams? Toronto stacked with a bunch of Korean talent, some of them rookies, some of them brought over from Philadelphia. So they've got quite a nice blend of veteran talent plus rookie talent, and then also Logics and Beast, which we'll see how they kind of get fit in. What's your perspective on that team?
I was never scared of Philly last year. So I think, Toronto with like part of Philly, I'm still not super scared about. Okay. I'm more wary of DC actually, that I didn't mention previously. I think they've got very strong pieces, some super strong pieces on paper, like Fury. I thought for sure Fury would stay with Philly, but he ended up going to DC.
Yeah, that's
which
wild.
is very pickup for them. Like Fury Mag, like that's a crazy, it's a crazy tank line, for sure, and the Decay obviously. So yeah, I think it'd be interesting to see how DC does as well. I'd be more like, if I were to think about teams that, if I were to choose between one to be, that I think would do better, I think I'd rate DC higher on paper than Toronto.
Sure.
So yeah.
How do you feel about the contenders' talent going into this year? Because often we have two different approaches to teams. Either you're the one that, you scouts your Overwatch League talent and you sign perhaps some of these bigger contracts to build out a great team. Washington Justice, great example of that. But then you have some other teams that prefer by doing like huge trials. They try to get everyone involved and then just pick out their favorites, trying to get as much practice in as possible with as many players as possible. I don't know how much contenders you've watched, but obviously as a GM, I can imagine that you're having to do some scouting. How do you feel about the talent in Korean contenders or even European, North American contenders when you look at teams like Paris Eternal that is doing a big, haul over, getting some talent in? London Spitfire, I still don't know what they're going to do as well. How do you feel about the contenders talent coming into the Overwatch League this year?
I'm interested to see how the European talent stacks up. I think there's definitely a lot of good European players. The question is there enough? Like, are the teams that are going to be mostly European, how, are all of them going to look decent, or are only like a few of those players going to shake out in terms of stacking up against the rest of AL? I think that remains to be seen. We haven't really seen EU against other regions for a long time since last Gauntlet. So it's really hard to say until it happens. Like Shockwave clearly can compete with, anyone in the league. And he was on like Raspberry Racers before. Like I remember talking to him I think I like Shockwave a lot as a player. I think he's a great young guy. He's got a good head on his shoulders. We've exchanged like Twitter DMs every now and then after he like ints my ranked games on Lucio or something. But yeah, so we were talking, and then he was last off season, and we just finished scrimming Vancouver. I think we beat the crap out of them in those scrims, unsurprisingly. And then he was having like a tough time. He was talking about how like it's tough for him to practice when Yaki's just on his ass on Tracer the entire time and he can't do anything. And I was like, yeah, I mean, it's tough, but I was like, keep your head up. Like, I think he showed everyone in matches that he's capable, like as an individual, he's capable of competing with the best. He just needs a good roster around him, and I think he'll thrive. And I think he's found that in Philly. But yeah, so I think there's no reason to expect that, just because you're from a region, you can't perform. Like Kevster, I think, is a really great another great example of a top DPS talent from EU. I think the talent from, I think as a region though, like Korea, like I think as a whole has stronger prospects that get brought up to the league. But I just don't know which ones from the EU region is going to pan out as much as I'm more certain, because I used to watch like all three regions like equally, but now like I've transitioned since we have a full Korean roster. I watch a lot more Korean contenders than I did EU. But the EU region was super top heavy anyways. It was just the British Hurricane and everyone else. They did lose finally.
Yes, they
against
did.
Obey. I did watch that. And I think player to watch out for from what I've heard through the grapevine is Paris's new flex support. So I'll be keeping an eye out on him. Khan. With the A's. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, I heard some good things about him, though I haven't watched enough of his games yet to actually know whether they're valid, but I've heard there's a lot of hype around him. I also think it's really interesting, though, that we've talked quite a lot so far about rookies being great. Every season, rookie talent being great. The rookies are winning MVP awards, this kind of stuff. Whereas your decision this year was to bring in 2 vets rather than 2 rookie talents. Do you think... are you concerned at all about teams like... I don't know who even. I mean, Houston have a rookie tank line. Toronto have a bunch of rookie players that they've signed alongside as well. Who else has got a bunch of rookies that might cause a storm? I don't know. Then you're looking kind of all rookies down at the bottom of the board as well. But do you think there's any risk of being outpaced in that sense by people who are more hungry?
So I think it just depends on your needs. And I think our needs, like why I send so many vets, is we needed... What we were missing it was towards the end of games, like in clutch situations, was we weren't able to close it out. And I think closing out games is something that vets bring a lot more to the table than rookies. Because rookies are like, it brings that raw firepower, but it's like in those clutch situations, like it's like, it's like, who would you take the shot, right? Would you have a vet in the NBA take a shot, or did you have a rookie? And you're just gonna be a vet. So it's like, would you rather have, so for example, like think of Carpe, like would you rather have Carpe take a shot, or would you rather have a rookie? It's gonna be Carpe, right? Because Carpe is known for being clutch. And I think being clutch comes with, you have to be a vet. You have to have that veteran savvy to be able to close out games. You've seen so many different scenarios. You've seen on the point so many times that you're like, this is what we need to do. Like it's very streamlined towards the end of games. Like you like there's no more noise. And I think as a rookie, you're thinking about so many possibilities. I forgot who quoted this, but I think like as you become more of an expert, like the options become more limited. Like, you just know that these are the ways to go.
Yeah.
And it's much more easier to make those decision making, and dumbing it down in clutch situations instead of, overthinking it, I think is something that vets bring.
What is, as kind of a wrapping up topic, what is your perspective on the debate that kind of has been running through Reddit recently about people like Ben Best, for example, who tweeted that he might not be an owl next year because people have been kind of prioritizing open trials for everybody to, showcase themselves. And then on the other flip side of that, you've got rookie Dan, who plays main tank as well, who tweeted, "It makes me kind of sad seeing everywhere that people would have rather seen other main tanks in my place when they all had the same tryouts and they had the same chances as me." Where do you fall as a GM with specific experience running this kind of stuff between the idea of we should hold open tryouts and let everyone compete and make it fair to I know what these guys are capable of. They've played in matches before, and I value that. Where do you fall on the kind of balance there, and how do you think the players should think about those kind of topics as well?
I'm more on the match side of things, but that wasn't always the case. I think before it was like, okay, because I think there's just so much noise when you host open trials, especially when you're hosting massive trials where you're just doing internals. Because the thing you have to realize is that I think it gets lost in like the trees is when you're doing open trials, the best player is the best player from that limited pool.
Mm-hmm.
Does that player stack up against Al when it's the best of the best? Like, unless you're scrimming Al teams and getting them that top level, like, did he pop off against like an Al team that's fielding their roster for next year? That's what they ultimately need to do. It doesn't matter that they're popping off against trials, because trials is like generally the pool of trials is much lower than what they're actually be competing against. So it introduces a lot of noise. Sometimes a player has an off day. And you hear a lot of stories about players that like, oh, I had one off day and then I got cut from trials, right? And like those things are tough. Like good players have off days. You see it in the league. You see it, in contenders. You see it during matches. Good players can have off days and they look bad sometimes. And it's just part of being human, right? Like they're not robots. Obviously, they all try to perform at like a robot level, but they're not. They have flaws and they're going to slip up sometimes. But that doesn't. You're looking for. So I prefer their body of work. I prefer looking at their body of work. We've done the trials thing before. And I think there's a lot of, as I said before, there's a lot of noise that comes out of trials. I prioritize, we didn't do any trials last year. I just said, hey, we're core, we're signing this runaway package deal. And that's that. Like, that's our roster. And I have confidence in that. And this year, the only trial we did was for DPS. We didn't trial any tanks.
Right.
We didn't trial any other, any supports and none of that. We just trialed for that one DPS slot we had left. Because I think at that point it becomes more valuable because we were actually scrimming like top Korean teams, top AL teams when we were doing those trials. So it's like now I actually can see how they stack up against talent of that caliber, and plus we're seeing how they integrate in our existing core or our core 5 or core 6. And so I think that's when I like trials, when you're trying to slot them into a core and you're trying to see how they mesh. Because otherwise trials is really just one big pug. If you think about it.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's very raw.
And everyone's trying to pop off individually. Everyone. So it's like you got your main tank that's trying to do big plays, and then you're just like, if they always feed, and then there's like certain players that work better in a pug environment, and like it's just like being good at tests, right? Some people are great at tests, some people are better like at just the schoolwork. And I think I think trials is a lot of noise, and it takes a lot of effort to kind of pick out. And there's a lot of places where you can go wrong, where you just become enamored with a player. So what I like to do is to have a talent board, like right when by the time the off season starts. So like similar to that wasn't the real talent board that I put up.
Yeah, I know. I wanted to ask you a question about this. I totally forgot. I wanted to ask you earlier on. So you guys have been memeing a lot in the off season, like in the run up to your announcement, and you've also. But the weird thing is, as well, you've also been really transparent with a lot of stuff. So you've been really transparent with like the contract details, which a lot of other teams aren't. Yeah. But at the same time, you've also been memeing. So when you put up this, for anyone who hasn't seen it, it was like a whiteboard with different columns for tank, DPS, and support, I think, right? And it was, or maybe it was like all 6 roles. And you had written down a bunch of different names on the board. I assumed it was a joke because I know that how GMs work, they have their roster already locked in by the time they're memeing about stuff with their teams like that. I knew you already had the roster assembled. So I'm like, why would you put out a bunch of players of which some of the people at the top of the list, because originally I didn't even realize it was alphabetical. I thought it was listed in terms of like priority or something. And I'm like, why would you do that? That makes no sense. Yeah. What was going on there?
So I just wanted, I think the best like baits always have an element of truth in them.
Okay.
Then you can feel the authenticity. So like there's some sort like I actually do have a talent board every season. I have a ranking at each position. I have OWL players there. I have free agents. I have every player that's eligible. and then I start narrowing it down. Once I cut it down, then I start ranking them. So that it obviously wasn't ranked because like that would be done, like that would be giving away, who I think is good, which is a competitive. I don't want that information out there. But yeah, so like I rank them. I talk to Kuki. I talk to coaches. Like, hey, this is where I think these players are ranked. Do you want to move anything? And then we operate off of that. So it's like then when I'm looking at when I'm negotiating contracts, when I'm reaching out to players, so I already have something I can reference. So like, because I think people misunderstand like negotiations. Like at the end of the day, signing a contract is actually an emotional thing. It's not. Everyone wants to think they're rational when they're signing contracts and making decisions, but it's not. Like emotions always plays an aspect into it, and just having something on paper. I mean, it's on a paper. It's on an Excel. It's on like a Google Sheet. But yeah, having something that I can reference and like center myself and be like, okay, this is where we rank this player. Is he worth that much more, or like then the next player down, right? Because then we start talking about like it's easy for you to just like, hey, you can get any player you want, but that's not how that works. You have a budget. Every team has a budget. You have amount of money that you're willing to spend at each position, and you have to learn to spend it wisely. And I think that helps keep me centered when I'm looking at that. Okay, this is our number one option. Number one option is also usually the most expensive.
Yeah.
Are they, sometimes they're 2x the price of the second option. Is that second person, half the player than the first person? If he's not, then it makes, it's probably the best decision like financially and, for the rest of the strength of the roster to spend less on that position, get the second option rather than the first. Like that's where that talent board starts coming into play. And like the nuances of roster building, all that. But yeah, so like there is a talent board. The one I put up, not a real one.
Yeah.
It had players that I have known were signed. Like Nixel, Tanks were up there. But I put people that where it wasn't public knowledge yet. Just had to make it fun. Throw off the trail. But all our actual players that we signed were on there.
Right.
So this is news to me. How many people are on this talent board? Like on a regular season, it's like stage 3. How many people are on your talent board at that time?
Let me take a look.
Let me take a look here.
Wait, you have a current talent board that you've set up?
Yeah, every offseason I have it, and I save it. So I have like so besides talent board, I also have like projected rosters, like their costs, their the projected roster we can have, what the budget, everything. But yeah, it's just what I do every offseason. I'm sure most gyms probably have a similar system. But this offseason we had 27 main tanks on our talent.
Whoa!
25.
And you felt good about those 27. Sorry, I interrupted you, but you felt like good about your opinion there?
Just who made the final cut of like notables that should be on there. It doesn't mean we considered it. Just that's just how many were on there. It's like, but yeah, off tank 25, hit scan 30, flex DPS 25, main support 22, flex support 25.
That's a lot of people to be considering because it feels like a tornado would have to hit a large amount of, I don't know, Overwatch facilities for you to be considering like the 20th person on your list. Like, I mean, it would be kind of crazy for you to go all the way down to that kind of level, wouldn't it?
No, but like most of these people are contract, like usually the top 10 or so are already contracted because if they're the top 10 of their position, they should be an L, right?
I see. These are not free agents.
But not all of them. And sometimes like there's an acquisition and in general, I just like, because that's their peer group that I'm comparing. So I'm like, if I'm picking up Yaki, I'm going to rank him in the fullest of flex DPS. Like, where does he rank?
Right.
Against the rest of the league or the rest of the talent. And that's going to include the top flex DPS in the league, right? So, so like each year I have a ranking of where they are. And then next season, it's like, okay, how has my thinking changed? Where are they now, right? Like, do we make any mistakes? Do I have to adjust like what I'm evaluating?
Can I bait some info out of you? Like you're not working for the Further Mayhem anymore. You're part of the Plat Chat brand. You're an analyst here. Who's your fantasy team? Like number one across the board. Come on, give us some.
Before I was working out, I did do a lot of fantasy. So like this is like yeah. And I obviously I won a few of the seasons, but back when fantasy was I wish I don't even think I could participate in fantasy if I wanted to. I'm trying to think.
No, with prize money probably, but for bands.
It would also be
who does fantasy for no money. That's just like
wow.
true.
That's a mood. Yep, that's a mood.
But yeah, I mean that's the whole point of fantasy, right? It's like it's fun, but there's some skin in the game because like otherwise then you get silly trades. It's like, well, there's no skin in the game, so like you just get dumb trades, right? Like I think season 1, like you trade away Jonak, like you're a complete idiot. You're just throwing the fantasy game, right? So I think to have like a good fantasy group, you need to have money in the game. You need to have skin in the game because otherwise you just get really silly stuff happening because nobody cares.
And also, to go back to your previous comment that you made a long time ago, you said that you believe all of the players on the Florida Mayhem are either top 5 or have top 5 potential. Now, I thought naively that was the same that most people use top 5 when people just throw it around and they're like, oh, of course he's a top 5 player. He's top 5. He's top 5. You mean that you've actually ranked all of the competition and you believe that your players are literally top 5, or you believe that they can get over the course of the season to being a top 5 player. You've actually put in the work to list them all out and make sure that if they're top 5, they're kicking someone else out of the list.
Yeah. And I think, top 5 potential is like, I think if you are like 10th, I mean, if you're 10th would be average, right?
Sure.
Or I guess,
yeah.
Theoretically speaking, right? If you're 10th at your position, 20 teams in the league, you're average. So I think if you are at 10th and you have room, you have room to go up 5 spots, right? So that's kind of what I'm thinking. And also based on my personal opinion of players, I don't even know if I ranked anyone 10th. Anyways, on my team. But yeah, this is actually, my list is actually smaller than it would be because it's just, since we're full Korean, there's no Western players on this talent. If I were back to John's question, like on a fantasy, like I'd have to do some more. I have to incorporate all the Western players because fantasy gives you a luxury of like, if comms weren't an issue, like if everyone spoke the same language, like what is the craziest roster you can have? And that's like, that's not realistic as
The other thing that fantasy does too, though, is it just assumes that if you have the money, you get the player, which isn't really how GM. Like, that's not how the real world works. It's more than just... The players aren't a commodity to be traded and sold. They have desires about what team they want to play for, what players they want to play with, the systems that they work in. They make a decision as well to sign on to you. They're not just a name that you can pick and drag across the place. So can you speak a little bit more to that? Like, to the average person, what they think you do is genuinely like fantasy Overwatch. Like, you're actually just trading and selling and just you go through your list and you're like, all right, well, I choose to buy slime and I have enough money, therefore I get slime. Can you explain some of the stresses and the talks that go into the GM kind of stuff in the off season?
Yeah, so I don't know if anyone realizes this, but not every org is backed by like $1 billion corporation. Like just newsflash, maybe not everyone has like a Philly level budget, right? Like maybe not everyone has Atlanta Reign. I'm not saying I don't know what their budgets are. I'm just saying, hypothetically speaking, like their parent orgs have more resources than more financial resources than our parent organization. Just it is what it is. So not every GM's working off the same budget. So it's not like in fantasy where it's like everyone gets the same budget and it's like, okay, it's a level playing ground. You go to find what you get the same budget. Find the best players in their slots. And there's also like as I said, it's an emotional decision. You got to talk to players. It's very stressful. And I think for me, I like working on things in parallel. So I'll talk to multiple players because I think something's going to fall through eventually. And it doesn't make sense for me to put all my eggs in one basket and like dedicate, like just because it also you end up negotiating against yourself. If you only have one option and you're just only talking to one option, that inflates their value and like they can get, they can just scalp you. Right. But if you're talking to multiple people, you keep yourself centered. You're like, okay. And then I have the talent board. So it's like, I can look at who, if their price gets too high, then I'm like, okay, that's how I determine if it's out of my price range or something. Right. It's like, I do not believe he's 2x, or like you're asking for 3x the price of this player. Like he's not 3x the talent. So like, that doesn't make sense. We can't do that if you're asking that. But yeah, it's a long process and there's multiple moving pieces. I consult with Cookie on every single decision. So it's not like I see an opportunity, I'm just like, we got to sign that player. And plus there's lag. Like if you offer a player, smart players, if some have an agency, some don't. But if they're on an agency, for for sure, Evolved, whoever's representing them, are sending that to every team in the league. Like, hey, we got X offer. Is there an offer for that player?
Yeah.
Right. So there's so many moving pieces. And then you got to talk to them, negotiate the contract, talk about like the environment, pitch them your team, what you can do for their career, what you envision their role is on your new team. Cookie's pitching to them. Like it's so involved. It's not just hey, we have a spreadsheet and we just select names and we just okay, now that person is signed. It's like there's also the lawyers, there's visas, there's so many things. Checkmate didn't even have a passport, so it's like we had to get a passport for him. So like some of these players, and it's like all for me. I want all our players to have visas as early as possible, so we have the option of going to Florida. So like right now, like my number one priority is like making sure Checkmate gets his visa on time for this season start. But yeah, that's all logistic stuff, but that's kind of like behind the scenes look on like what goes into every single player signing. There's multiple negotiations. There might be a bidding war. There might be, you don't necessarily having the highest offer doesn't guarantee you that player.
Yes. Yeah.
A lot of the times they might even use that as leverage to get a little bit more from the team that they actually want to go to. There's plenty of ways and go sideways.
Yeah. That's something that's been discussed a lot with the Shock recently as well, in terms of Andy Miller came out and said that they weren't the highest bidder for any of the players in this offseason because people want to go and play for the Shock. So it's cool that there are different ways of being able to leverage that. I think you put out a tweet as well about, was it you that put out the tweet about prize money too?
Yeah, just looking at prize money, but I can still talk about so I think every single player contract we signed this year has been our scaling contracts. So there's a lot of performance incentives in there. So their contract scales with how well we do.
Okay,
because I think
that's cool.
Interesting.
Because I think a big issue, and I watch a lot of sports, watch a lot of NBA, and I think sports contracts generally have a lot of built-in incentives. So it's like this is their base salary, but it scales with how well they do. And I think that's something I wanted to bring into Overwatch League and like the way we structure our contracts, because I think players also want to be rewarded for, like, if you're getting, say, example, you're getting 100K, right? 100K just for, being on a bad team, great deal. But like you're on a bad team, right?
Yeah.
100K on like a decent team plus its skills. Or, for example, you get a 100K offer from a bad team. You're like, okay, well, I guaranteed 100K. But what if you got a 80K offer or 70K offer from a much better team, but your contract scales based on performance? So if you have a great season, you could potentially earn up to 100K or even more. So it's like tweaking stuff like that and negotiating, what bonuses those players want. That was like a big part of my offseason. Those negotiations, because I think we have probably the best scaling contracts, or like the most bonuses in each contract of any team. I don't know. I haven't seen the other contracts, but I find it hard to imagine, because I think most of the contracts I've seen we've traded players have been very cookie cutter. Like, hey, you get X amount of money and you get this cut of the prize pool.
Yeah. Not being
so like
creative.
We added like monthly tournament bonuses or bounties. So like they basically have every match there's money on the line for them, or there's potential bonus money there. So they're like incentivized from start to end of the season.
That's pretty cool.
To play well.
Yeah, obviously, you've now negotiated those contracts, but you feel like more teams will follow your suit and actually get those kind of terms as well in their contracts? Because I felt like the initial couple of seasons of the Overwatch League, it sort of felt like the prize money wasn't really there for the players to justify. I mean, obviously you want to compete and play well, etc. But speaking to some of the players, they weren't like that all excited about their prize winnings, because they knew that a large chunk of their actual winnings came from the salary itself. And so behind the scenes, there was always this like kind of stigma where it was like, well, it doesn't really matter if we got third, fourth, or fifth to sixth, because the prize money is like, it's not going to make a big difference. Do you feel like we're perhaps moving into that direction for the entire league, where we'll see more of those performance bonuses and contracts?
I think it's just a natural evolution of leagues. Like in the beginning, it's like no one really knows what they're doing, and it's like everyone's new. Everyone's trying to, like baby's first owl contract. Like you're just like, okay, here's the base salary. Here's okay, we have to give you a prize pool cut. All right, here's the standard prize pool cut, and like you go with that, you go with the number. And I think now it's like, to me, it's like if you don't have, like I don't want to pay someone, like say we have an awful season, right? And from a team perspective, from running a team perspective, like paying someone like a guaranteed amount of money and just having a bad season, like that's not a great like business move, or like, that's not a great way to structure the contract. Whereas if you're scaling it with performance, then it's like, okay, you get paid according to how you perform. And I think that's much more reasonable. Like that's good from an org standpoint, and it's also feels good from a player standpoint. It's like you're really earning that salary, and it gives you, you can move around pieces, and you have the opportunity to build a better team with bonus incentives than you do with just a simple like base contract.
Yeah, I mean, I can see it being a bit of a pendulum, though, because, I mean, always in other sports as well, it's a pendulum, it swings back between, player rights and organizations and who has the advantage in negotiations. So I can see, the Overwatch League having time to figure out what is best for player contracts and how those will develop moving forward. So I can totally see more teams adapting your philosophy now and implementing more performance bonuses. But we might even get to a point where down the line, players will say, hey, performance bonuses are a bit too heavy on these contracts, because at the end of the day, I know I'm great. I know I'm a great player, and I will earn my salary. Like I will come to this team and make a big difference, right? But it's not always my fault if the team underperforms, because I can do as much as I want in game, bring my individual skill to the table, but it's always not going to be enough to be the big difference maker, right? So I think, as you mentioned, it's a bit natural, right? So we'll perhaps see these contracts develop over time and see a bit of a back and forth swing to see what is best for the league.
So that brings up an interesting point. So I think I gave some of my players like the options, like just one of the clauses, like is either like you play in a match and you get a bonus, like you're a starter for a match, and that's more for like DPS, since we have a 3 DPS rotation. So I wanted to incentivize like, like check me, we didn't bring you here just to sit on the bench, like we want you to play. And this is how we're going to incentivize you. It's like, and then people had the option of either choosing a slightly larger one. It's like you play and you start in matches, plus we win. Then you get a little bit, you get, that like skills, you're betting on yourself to win. Like that, if I'm playing, I'm winning. And then as opposed to just showing up and, whether we win or lose, you get like a starter bonus for that match. So like, so it's like, it's different. And I just left it up to them. Like, hey, you want more, but you have to win, or you just want a standard, like a basically guarantee, like as long as you start, you get this, this level of bounty for that game.
So I guess my immediate thought hearing that then is, what's the approach when it comes to different metas and DPS players having roles in different metas? Because if DM, for example, for Shanghai took on a contract that says, hey, the more matches you play, the more money you earn, but at the same time, he's very much a specialist for that team. Was that a consideration at all when you made those DPS contracts offers? Because some players will naturally, you'll want them to almost sit on the bench and polish what they're great at. So when the time comes, when the meta comes, you can implement them and they'll bring their A game. And you don't necessarily want to incentivize DPS players to play off heroes just so they can be a starter and get some extra money. Was that a consideration at all?
I think I made it clear from the beginning, like, Kuki, I was like, Kuki is final say on the roster. And there are financial considerations, like, he makes the final decision, but I was like very clear to the player. I was like, this is not his decision on who to play, is not going to be like, oh, because you want to get your bounty. It's going to be because did you earn that spot? So it's not, I kind of set the tone early on that it's like, we're not going to be like, don't come to me and be like, hey, I'm not getting playtime because, I want this bonus. It's like, you have to earn the bonus. You have to prove that, you're better at that hero that we need than the other DPS, or so yeah, I mean, I think that's where we're working from, and it's just like it's just a pure bonus. It's not like they're still getting a base salary. It's just like, this is how we wanted to incentivize it a little bit more. And I don't think any of our players I would consider specialists. So for now, I think that's not something we have to think about. But yeah, I mean, that's definitely a consideration moving forward. But then I would advise a player, like, if you're worried about that, then you should probably think of, if you're truly like that great at the particular hero, our win rate with you should be more, or should be very high when we actually field you. So then you should choose the one where if you start and we win, then you get an additional bonus. So then you get more money because you're betting on yourself, or you're betting on yourself that when I'm fielded, we're going to win.
I think what's interesting to me is just that the players are given more choice in terms of their contract. Because whatever decision you make, you have made that decision with the knowledge and like a prediction of your path throughout the year. And no one's really going to know that. It's not like the organization knows that. It's not like the player knows that. And it's not like either of them have full control over that either. I mean, you could just be a dick and bench him the entire time, but then you'd fuck over your own season and that wouldn't help you in any sense either. So I like the way that it's mutually beneficial in that sense. And it seems to strike an interesting balance between performance bonus and like benefits for the player and the organization in terms of business and reward.
I mean, I worked in corporate, like the normal 9-to-5 job before this, and we've all, if anyone's worked in, the normal corporate 9-to-5 jobs, we've all gotten contracts where you're just like, this is just our standard bonus, and you don't get a choice in it. And it's like, sometimes it's just like, this is shit. Like, this is awful. Like this doesn't incentivize me this doesn't motivate me to, want to get that bonus. Like maybe the bonus is too small. Maybe you wanted that bonus somewhere else. Maybe you work differently. So I don't like taking like a one size fits all approach to contracts. And I kind of wanted to like tailor each contract to their needs. So it's like, hey, if you think you're going to be an all-star, like let's talk about an all-star bonus, right? Let's talk about a role star bonus. Let's talk about, do you want MVP of the match? Like there's so many things you can incentivize.
Sure.
And I think having a player be involved in those discussions means that they don't like coming out of it when they sign, they could actually feel good about the contract. And it's not just like, well, I had no other choice. Like I just felt like they took a gun to my head and they're like, you're going to take these bonuses whether you want it or not.
I'm also giggling at the idea of like the match MVP bonus or all-star bonus, because there's just so much potential for drama and juice now about people being like, hey buddy, can you vote for me? I've got a sick bonus in my contract.
That happens in sports. Like
it does.
I'm pretty sure there's probably MVP or some sort of like benchmark in sports that's like in most sports contracts that you just don't hear about until they actually hit it. And I think I mean, there's definitely MVP contracts for like all the NBA players. I'm sure.
Yeah.
And everyone.
I really appreciate the transparency.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for that. So I have to ask now, as part of the talent team for the Overwatch League, do you actually have like player of the match as part of the bonuses in those contracts?
Oh, I don't actually know.
Okay, just asking, because sometimes some of us, we might have a bit of a say in that. So, don't reach out to me for bonuses, but I'm just saying, might have to take it a bit more seriously moving forward, trying to make it as fair as possible.
I don't think we have too many of those. I think it's more, we definitely have like finals MVP one.
Sure.
Or like
big deal awards versions.
Yeah. But I mean, even then, those are like 30% of that is, public, or like 30%. Like I forgot what the split was for talent. Like you guys still have a significant say in that as well.
It's pretty small. I think it's like, I don't know. I think the talent is maybe like 20% because there's a bunch of other people that also vote.
Yeah, you're pulled in with the coaching staff, right?
Exactly.
But I'm saying overall. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, but it's very interesting. And also, what I do appreciate from all of your announcements this year has been the transparency in terms of contract length, the situation for the players, having like the AMA streams and stuff like that. I just to branch outside of Overwatch for a moment, I've loved what Henry G has been doing in CS recently with his Cloud9 roster, where he detailed all of the contract details in terms of like salary and how much was like the signing bonus and how much was the buyout and stuff like that, so that you can kind of think about the players and what they had spent on them versus their performance in the server. And you can use that to start building these narratives and understand whether teams have made good decisions when it comes to the offseason. So I think that the more we kind of amble down that road in Overwatch, the more interesting it gets as well for the average fan too, to have some idea of what this player was picked up for, what they're expected to do, what their price, at least in some rough sense, because prices are still not actually public when it comes to Overwatch League. But I do appreciate the transparency. I think it makes it more interesting for everybody.
Thank you. But I think too, that the C9 Colossus thing, I didn't like that there's no context to, like, what are you comparing those numbers to as the public?
Sure.
Like obviously, like there's no
the only one.
yeah, you're paying them millions. It's like, okay, but how much is like? There's no comparable, so I don't think there's no contextual number. So I don't really see the benefit of like, yeah, I can. I mean, I don't think I can legally, but if I could legally just release the salaries, like what do those numbers mean though? Like, there's no context. It's like,
sure, yeah, because most people have no idea what the average market price is. Actually, though, the Overwatch League does publish average market price numbers. So in an Overwatch world, that would actually be more contextual than it is in CS:GO.
Yeah, but it's average though. It's like that doesn't include like by position. Like maybe averages by position. Then you can start to compare. Like, okay, are we paying them more than average at this position? And I think those would be numbers that would be. I don't even think we have that. Because I don't know how much Philly's paying their players.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, and so we don't know. But I think having it by position, maybe, because I think a fan was recently. I think we had like I forgot where I saw this, but someone asked a question like, "Is their average salary broken down by position?" I think that is very interesting. I think maybe if the league provided that context. I mean, it doesn't really matter if they don't release the salaries for every player. But I think just having that understanding, like do DPS players get paid more than main tanks? Do main tanks, who gets paid the least position? That'd be interesting.
It would be really interesting
to know.
Yeah. I think part of the Cloud9 thing is just like setting a precedent for the scene as well. So obviously they're the first team to really do it, but hopefully other teams follow suit, because you can discuss how much does your experience really change knowing what the salaries are and all that stuff. I do think there's some interesting information knowing how much pressure is on a player to perform. For example, if you get handed a huge contract and you get played above market average, now pressure is on you to actually perform and bring the results for that team, right? Because otherwise you can look at the management and you can say like, hey, they gave this big contract to this player, never lived up to the hype, bit of a failed transfer in some aspects, and you put so much pressure on some of these players. I think that would really contribute to the stakes on some of these regular season matches, right? Because sometimes we've been in a scenario with the league where you have so many regular season matches, they didn't really have a greater meaning to them until we had where you play for seeding for the stage finals, which we had last year, right? But for the most part, we've been missing this big factor when it comes to the regular season matches. And I think knowing what's on the line contractually, money making wise, money is always going to be this like one thing that people look at and which people deem like very important, right? So I think it would be very interesting to know like which players in the league get overpaid or underpaid and deserve a bigger or a smaller contract, and knowing what's on stake for those matches.
Listen, if Astro makes his roster salaries and buyouts public, maybe you can start talking about compare. But yeah, I'm curious, how much does that cost Astro? How much does that cost Fuel? I have no idea.
Yeah.
But everyone, all the fans think they're thinking like crazy numbers, right? Who knows?
Yeah.
But I think if Astro starts, then maybe we can talk about comparing our numbers to Astro's. And yeah.
Well, it'd be fun anyway to watch you battle a bunch of different teams in North America. I'm extremely looking forward to next season. I think the level of competition just looks insane, honestly. I wish you guys all the best in the future. I'm not willing to 1v1 Yaki on any different heroes. I just want to put that out there towards the end of this. I have no interest in battling him. I know I would lose. I lost for an account of Fire as well. I only managed to gather some horrific pity victory at the end. And then get paraded around as a bald mascot for the Florida Mayhem. This is the extent of my career. It's sad. Honestly.
You got an Overwatch League contract. Boo-hoo. Must be so dreadful and awful.
You know what? I am legally allowed to release the numbers of my Overwatch League contract. Albert didn't pay me a bloody thing. No, there was no. It was absolute daylight robbery. This guy's a joke.
We tried.
He did actually.
I actually emailed Spectre and I was like, I want to get Sideshow on a 14-day contract because that's what we agreed to for the minimum. And he said, we can't because it would mess with Sideshow's ability to stay in the US.
Yes,
so,
it would. I would have had to go to a different visa because I would be a player instead of a broadcaster. Yeah. And so I would have had to leave the US and get a different visa.
Well, that's a hallmark in your career now.
If it was just like, a easy to execute, like, mean thing, like, perfect. But didn't want to get into the visa issues because those get sticky.
So I'm afraid it was all a lie. To pull back the curtain a little bit, there was no ink on the paper.
Take them off Wikipedia.
I know I don't deserve my spot on Wikipedia. I was never
Paid
really
in
an L
marketing
player.
by the
I know.
Florida Mayhem.
I know.
Wow.
Yeah,
What an achievement.
tragic.
There you go.
Well, thank you very much for this interview, though, Albert. I've really appreciated it. I don't have any further questions. We have grilled you for a huge amount of time, and I know that you're an incredibly busy man. Do you have anything else, Jonathan?
I need to get back to Cyberpunk.
No, you were just grumbling through your mustache, so I didn't quite know whether that was just you wanted to.
No. I mean, this was way longer than I actually thought it would, so I'm kind of surprised we're done for 2 hours. So yeah, you're just incredibly grateful for your time, Albert. Thank you so much, and we'll let you get back to Cyberpunk. Okay, one final question.
Yeah.
Which life path did you choose in Cyberpunk?
Oh, I chose Corpo. I'm going to say it.
Okay, chose Corpo.
That
there you
makes
go.
so much sense.
I'm a real businessman in Cyberpunk. I'll admit it.
There you go.
Oh, sweet. Well, thank you very much, Albert. Yeah.
I'm a corpo trying to take down the corporation. So
Okay, you're trying to take down the corporations from the inside.
yeah.
Watch out,
All
John
right.
Spector.
It's just a game. It's just a game.
Yeah, it's all just a game. All right, appreciate it. And if you enjoyed this, drop a like, subscribe to the Plat Chat YouTube channel. There will be another episode coming on Monday where we'll be talking about all the real, I say real juice, this was real juice, but the extra additional overflowing amounts of juice that happen across the rest of the league as well. So stay tuned for that. We'll catch you on Monday.